There is a moment in history that most people never notice. It does not arrive with sirens. It does not announce itself with headlines. It comes quietly, almost politely, like a knock on a door you weren't expecting. And if you are not paying attention, you miss it entirely. But those who have lived long enough, those who have seen cycles of war, peace, collapse, and recovery, recognize the pattern. They feel it, deep in the chest. A subtle tightening, a quiet question. Have I seen this before? Because what is unfolding now between Iran and the United States is not just another geopolitical conflict. It is something older, something layered, something almost biblical. And for those who understand both economics and faith, the question becomes unavoidable. Is this just a war? Or is it part of a timing we've seen before? A timing that strangely often circles back to one date, Easter. Now, to understand why that question even exists, we have to step away from the noise. Step away from daily news. Step away from market charts. And look instead at patterns. Because history, real history, does not move randomly. It moves in rhythms. And those rhythms often align with moments of symbolic meaning. Not because politicians are religious, but because human beings are. And even the most powerful leaders in the world are still influenced consciously or unconsciously by timing that carries weight. Easter is not just a religious holiday. It represents death and resurrection, collapse and renewal, endings and beginnings. And when you overlay that symbolism onto geopolitics, something interesting begins to appear. If you look back across decades, many major conflicts, many negotiations, many turning points, tend to cluster around symbolic windows. Not always, but often enough to make you pause. Now let's bring this back to today. The tension between Iran and the United States has been building not suddenly, but gradually. Economic pressure, sanctions, proxy conflicts, energy routes, strategic positioning. This is not a war that began with a single spark. It is a slow burn, and slow-burning conflicts behave differently. They don't explode randomly. They resolve when pressure reaches a point where continuation becomes more costly than conclusion. And here's where economics enters the picture. Because war is not just about ideology, it is about cost. Sustaining military readiness, securing supply chains, managing global oil flow, all of these create enormous economic strain. Now consider the current environment. Oil markets are sensitive. Supply routes are fragile. Inflation remains a concern globally. And for older generations, those living on pensions, fixed incomes, or retirement savings, these shifts are not abstract. They are personal. Fuel prices rise. Food costs climb. Utilities follow. Every prolonged conflict increases pressure on everyday life. And governments know this. They always have, which is why timing matters. If negotiations are underway, if both sides are testing the limits, then the question becomes, when is the most likely moment for resolution? Not the ideal moment, the strategic one. And historically, leaders often prefer moments that carry symbolic closure, moments that feel like a turning point. Because ending a conflict is not just a military decision, it is a narrative decision. You are not just stopping a war, you are telling a story to the world. And what better story than one of renewal? One of peace after suffering? One of a new beginning? That is exactly what Easter represents. Now, does that mean this conflict will end at Easter? No, history is not that predictable. But what it does suggest is that periods like Easter create psychological windows. Windows where leaders are more willing to finalize agreements, where populations are more receptive to peace, where markets are ready to shift direction. And here is where it becomes even more interesting. Because markets themselves often anticipate these moments. They move before the official announcement. Oil prices may begin to soften. Gold may stabilize or retreat. Risk assets like equities or even cryptocurrencies may begin to rise. Not because peace has been declared, but because the probability of peace is increasing. This is something experienced investors understand deeply. The market does not wait for confirmation. It moves on expectation. And expectations are often tied to timing. Now imagine you are a decision maker. You are balancing military realities, economic pressures, and public sentiment. You know that prolonging the conflict risks further instability, but ending it too abruptly may signal weakness. So you look for a moment that justifies closure, a moment that feels natural, and this is where symbolic timing becomes powerful. Ending a conflict near Easter allows a narrative of transformation. It reframes the story. It shifts perception. It gives both sides a way to step back without appearing to retreat. Now let's step even deeper, because there is another layer here that most people overlook. Faith itself influences behavior not just at an individual level, but at a cultural level. Even in secular governments, cultural memory remains. Leaders understand the emotional impact of certain dates. They understand how timing affects perception, and perception in politics is everything. For seniors watching this, those who have lived through multiple cycles, you may already sense this. You may remember moments where wars seemed endless, until suddenly they weren't, where negotiations dragged on, until suddenly an agreement appeared. And often those moments felt strangely aligned with something larger, not necessarily divine intervention, but something that felt timed. Now let's consider the alternative. What if the conflict does not end around Easter? What does that tell us? It suggests that the underlying pressures are still too strong, that economic or strategic incentives to continue outweigh the benefits of resolution. And in that case, the implications are different. Oil could remain elevated. Inflation could persist. Markets could remain volatile. And for retirees, that means prolonged uncertainty, which is why understanding timing is not just an academic exercise. It is practical. Because preparation is not about predicting exact outcomes. It is about recognizing windows of change and positioning yourself accordingly. So what should you be watching? Not headlines, not speculation, but signals. Watch energy prices. Watch market sentiment. Watch diplomatic language. When rhetoric shifts from confrontation to possibility, when language softens, when phrases like framework, progress, or constructive dialogue begin to appear, those are signs that the system is moving toward resolution. And if those signals begin to align with symbolic timing windows, then the probability increases. Not certainty, but probability. And in both investing and life, probability is everything. Now there is one final thought to consider, something deeper, something that goes beyond economics and politics. Why do these patterns exist at all? Why does human history seem to move in cycles? Why do moments of destruction often precede renewal? These are not just economic questions. They are philosophical, even spiritual. Because at its core, Easter is not about a specific event in time. It is about a pattern of suffering followed by transformation. And whether you approach that from a religious perspective or a purely human one, the pattern remains. We break, we rebuild, we fall, we rise. And perhaps, just perhaps, what we are witnessing now is another turn in that cycle. Not the end of history, but a chapter that may be approaching its turning point. And when that moment comes, it will not feel dramatic. It will not arrive with certainty. It will arrive quietly, like that knock on the door. And the only question is, will you recognize it? Or will it pass unnoticed? Like so many moments before it? Because history does not wait. But those who understand its rhythm are never truly caught off guard.